Thank you.
All right. Good morning. So Toni Cunningham and I are here to request funds to study possible expansion of Crocker Farm. This has been raised as part of Dr. Morris's proposal of a potential solution to elementary school buildings. And one of the ways to, quote, get to 600 involves Crocker Farm. So Crocker Farm currently has approximately 350 K through 6 students. They take up 19 classrooms, and the building is about 72,000 square feet. There's also a preschool wing, which is on the first floor, that has 5 classrooms with 65 students. And you can see in this aerial photo, to the west end there is the library and the cafeteria, and centrally there's a main entrance, and the gym is located towards the west end, but it is centrally located within the building. That blue arrow to the bottom left is the preschool entrance, and the gym is accessible through that, for example, for polling times, but it is surrounded by classrooms. So, how would Crocker Farm possibly be affected by the proposal by Dr. Morris? And there's 2 scenarios where this could come up. One is if the 6th grade does not move to the middle school. And in that case, it was talked of having Crocker Farm expanded, but what that would mean is that we have 1,120 K through 6 students district-wide. If you put 560 at a new consolidated school, that would mean you'd have to house the other 560 at Crocker Farm, which means about 200 more K through 6 students. And we have indicated in this that preschool would likely have to relocate, although that's part of what would have to be studied because the facility is only so big to accommodate this. And the fact is we really don't know, can the Crocker Farm site and the Crocker Farm building accommodate that kind of expansion? The other way that Crocker Farm might be affected is if you even still move the 6th grade out and move them to the middle school, it could be that we would want to have smaller, more equally sized K through 5 schools. So rather than have a 600 student school and a 360 student school for those 960 kids, you could consider having 2 schools of equal size, 480 students at each, the consolidated and Crocker Farm, would still involve having 130 more K through 5 students. So Crocker Farm may come into play, and where we are in the process right now is we don't know, but there is information that we could gather to find this out. So it's not just a matter of you've got more kids, so you need more classrooms. Well, that is true. That is part of it. You have to go from 19 to either 28 classrooms for K through 6 or 24 for K through 5. And that involves a substantial increase in square foot use. However, you also would need to expand the gym, the library, and the cafeteria, so the common spaces in the school. These numbers that you have up here, the current size of the gym is just from part of the study that when we did the Fort River School Building Committee study, we actually went through Crocker Farm to look at it. So that about 3,000 feet is the current size of Crocker Farm, as is the library and the cafeteria. The other numbers for a 560 and a 480 student school are derived from the Massachusetts School Building Authority space summary template. So there's a template that you can pull up and you say how many students are in this school, and it will tell you how big they think that the library and the cafeteria and the gymnasium should be. And you'll see from this that currently the gym is about half the size that it should be, and actually it's half the size that it should be for what it is now. Because that 6,000 square feet is what a 360 kid school should have as well. It's a very small gym. Just to give you some perspective, Wildwood and Fort River, they're about 4,100 square feet. So they're all undersized, but Crocker is really small. So you see that you would have to increase the square footage, not just for classrooms, but for these other spaces as well. Things that we don't know right now, because we're just very early in the process, is what would be the impact of any consolidation beyond the district-wide special education programs. That might require space in a Crocker Farm expansion as well. And if you're going to increase the student population, that's going to have an impact on bus and car traffic and parking. Parking was actually just recently increased in a few years ago because that was at a premium, and that would have an impact as well. The other thing you have to consider with square foot is that these estimates don't include a grossing factor, which is basically all the room around rooms, so hallways and such. So when you say, oh, I've got to increase it by, 10,000 square feet, well, you have to increase it by 10,000 square feet times 1.4 or 1.5, because you need spaces for the hallways and the mechanical and so on. So it's not a one-to-one correlation. So we have heard significant support for doing this, but the question has been, why now? Why do we need to do this at this moment? It's an important piece of this complicated puzzle to figure out both logistically and financially what we should be doing with our elementary schools. Having this knowledge is either going to limit or expand our options about what we could do. We may well find out that you can't fit 560 kids at Crocker Farm, K-6 kids, and that might take that off the table. I don't know if you're familiar with the Regional Master Use Facility Study, but that was just recently completed to look at moving middle school to the high school or to add 6th grade to the middle school. And it was an incredibly valuable exercise. So for $90,000, we studied both of those schools and discovered that, in fact, it doesn't make sense to move 7th and 8th grade onto the high school. It's cost prohibitive, and for other reasons, it didn't make sense. And that was actually one of the other options that are involved in how to get to the consolidation plan. And by spending that money and doing that activity now, we know that we don't have to think about that option anymore. What we're proposing would likewise provide that information.
It's back.
Is it back? Sorry.
Yeah, I do need to ask you to keep try and finish up in about 2 or 3 minutes.
So one of the important things is, but if we know this information, we can have more accurate cost analysis. So that will help us in our decision making. It would also demonstrate to the MSBA that we're taking actual action to move ourselves along. We've seen that with the Fort River School Building Committee and the Regional District Planning Committee and Facilities Use, and this would be likewise. There is no evidence that the MSBA would fund or reimburse for either a study of Crocker Farm or for construction on that site. So MSBA projects are limited to this priority school that gets accepted. And so whatever we do to understand what's going on and to do what we're going to do to Crocker Farm is going to be on us in any case. The important reason to do it now is that it's going to shorten our process. We've already shortened our process with the work that we've done, any future process for a feasibility study. This would also save us money in the long term by shortening that. The other thing is that we have much needed maintenance and repair work plans that are coming up, which we're very thankful for, and we're very happy that that's happening. If you know what are the possibilities and what might be impacted, that would better inform that work and possibly limit it or change it around and change your priorities. So I already talked about the Master Use Facility Study. That costs $90,000. This is a much smaller scope. It's one school. It's a more specific question. And because of the 2002 addition renovation at Crocker Farm, a lot of the site analysis, looking at survey and having an analysis of building, is already done. So we would estimate this would be no more than $40,000 to do this, probably less. And in terms of how to pay for it, which I know is what you guys are doing, trying to fit these pieces together, it could be that what we learned from this study tells us that maybe you should hold off on some of these repairs because that would be impacted if, in fact, we do need to turn to Crocker Farm for our elementary school use, and if there was an addition renovation, that could impact that and say, really, you should hold off on these skylights, for example, because that roof's going away. So thank you for your time, and we're happy to talk to you.
So turn to other members of the committee first, see if there are questions from other members of the committee. Okay.
I know this is coming late, and as with the North Amherst project, is short, but I'm going to ask a similar question. Have you had a chance to talk to school committee members or Dr. Morris about this? And, I don't see, we've got Eric here for school committee, but I don't think we've heard from Dr. Morris about his thoughts. So I'd be curious if you have talked to him, what he told you.
So when we submitted this request, well, initially, actually, we floated the idea with Mr. Mangano and Dr. Morris and Mr. Roy Clark. And when it came to the deadline to submit resident requests and it hadn't been included in the proper channels, that's when we decided to submit this ourselves, just so it didn't get overlooked. And then last week, I personally met with Mr. Nakajima and Ms. McDonald to discuss my reasons for why I thought it was important. Maria sent the request as a courtesy to the entire school committee once we submitted it, and we shared it with Mr. Mangano as well. And I also sent an email to Mr. Roy Clark asking about the request for $100,000 for the skylights at Crocker Farm. In his request, he outlined that that's $3,000 per skylight, which would be 33 skylights. And I wondered if there are 33 that are currently leaking and needing replaced, or if possibly could there be a capacity limitation of how many could be done in a fiscal year, and could that possibly be a source of funds to be redirected to this study? So we have reached out extensively. We had hoped that the school committee, that the school administration would include this in their budget, but since it wasn't included, that's why we submitted this request.
Yeah. Eric.
Yeah, and I know Allison is on the line, so if she wants to jump in, that would be great. So the school committee didn't take a vote. Our capital budget or request for the elementary district was on an Amherst School Committee agenda, and so we did actually discuss this request. And the superintendent agreed that this kind of analysis would almost certainly have to be done as part of a new project, so that the actual elements of the request and the analysis, he agreed needed to be done. And I think his concern, and by the way, the committee also generally, again, didn't take a vote, but generally the discussion was favorable in terms of this request. I think the challenge we got into was the superintendent was clear that those items that were put into the school district's capital requests were the district's highest priorities. And so knowing that the town has a lot of other needs and always more requests than funds available, it wasn't clear how to slot this kind of request in. One thing I would add is that I'd talked to the superintendent about the question of where we were going to go with the chillers and this discussion of some of the requests that have been put forward in the budget that were very expensive, and lease versus purchase alternatives, and that if the items for the schools, the dollar amount for the schools dropped considerably, and the JCPC or the town were amenable to funding this would be a worthwhile thing to consider. I don't know. Again, I don't know if Allison has anything she wants to add, but I would love to.
I just got notified that Allison would.
Okay, just Allison.
Okay, thank you. I know we're running short on time, so I won't speak more. I echo the comments that Eric just made, that we on the committee are supportive of this, and it's a matter of understanding where it could fall in our priorities, and if knowing some of the things that are moving around with the chillers in particular, if there's room to pull this in. So I won't belabor it, because everything that Eric just said is my perspective as well.
Alex, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess is the cost for the study somewhere in the out years?
I don't think that it is now that I'm aware of. I mean, and it sort of gets to what my question was, is that, as has been indicated now in the conversation, the feasibility study would have to look at the school, and the question is whether, then, to my mind, whether there's, first of all, an advantage to doing the feasibility work earlier. Ms. Kopicki spoke to some of that in her presentation. Another question is, when is the timing sequence necessary? And the third one is whether we in fact might be reimbursed for some of the cost if we wait, whereas if we've expended the money first, we won't be reimbursed. That certain of, I don't know if Mr. Mangano and where his other head is anything to offer on any of that.
Yeah, I think I kind of agree with the request, or the information request, that we don't really know what the MSBA would cover until we're into the feasibility study. So it's possible that this was part of the plan, that they might reimburse part of that study. It's also possible they might say no, because that's not the school that we're looking at. So I think it's hard to know the exact answer to that.
Yeah, we do need to keep moving, but yes.
So I had spoken to Dr. Morris about just this issue a couple months ago, and we had submitted questions to the MSBA, and this was one of the very specific questions, which is that would any work to study a different building or to do construction on a building that wasn't directly involved in that MSBA process, would it be reimbursable? We asked for a written answer to that. My understanding of MSBA policies and looking at every other MSBA project and all the budgets, they do not involve any money for any other project in town that would be impacted by the primary project. I think that this is an important question to get an answer to, and I think that it would be best received by the MSBA, and we'd get a quicker answer if it came from an official rather than a resident. So by all means, we'd like to have the answer to that. But if you wait and do this after we get into a feasibility study or not, and let's say we get in December, it's going to take a couple months to get going and to do our eligibility period, and then the feasibility study starts, and we get 30 months, but we don't have to take 30 months. If we get that information and we do work now, and we spend these next several months as we're waiting to hear about this, we're way ahead of the game. We shorten our process later, and we may not know, we may not even need to study this aspect any further, and why waste time during the feasibility study if we could have known that for really not a lot of money right now.
I'd also like to add that there is a cap to what the MSBA reimburse, and it's very likely that we will reach that cap with the regular feasibility study of the priority school. So it's unlikely we wouldn't be getting reimbursed to the full amount anyway. So I think this, if it's 40,000 or 30,000, we're going to be on the hook for this no matter what. And if we do it now, there's a possibility it could end up saving us $800,000 in the future, because if it shortens our process, even if it shortens it by 6 months, the escalation on an $80 million project, the town portion of that escalation is $800,000. So by doing this now, instead of putting it off until later, it could be a significant saving for the town.
So I have one other comment to make, and I don't think it affects the bottom line question as to whether we should consider putting money into a feasibility study. I think that's something we have to decide on its own merits because, as has been pointed out, unless we, in order to explore the question of whether we would want to have the excess capacity of students placed in in Crocker Farms, we need to go to Crocker Farm and look at the potential. The other part that I'm not certain about is the concept of evening out the population in 2 elementary schools, which I view as, first of all, a different question entirely, and secondly, whether that might in fact reduce the amount of assistance we would get from MSBA because it would be putting construction money into the school. It's not the primary school. Eric?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that when the school committee was discussing the request, we actually weren't debating, discussing, or endorsing the question of whether we want to even out the population or not. We were looking at sort of the bottom line question of, under some scenarios, as was accurately described, one of the places we would need to expand enrollment is Crocker Farm, and so there's a practical question of figuring out how and under what circumstances we could actually expand the capacity in Crocker. So I'm just being clear about this. We were endorsing the notion of doing this analysis, but there wasn't any particular discussion or endorsement of the notion of changing the enrollment proposal. That's a discussion for the future.
And when you say doing the analysis, you're saying doing this analysis now before there's we're invited into the process, which is the essential next step.
Well, I would say that getting the question that was raised around asking about reimbursement, we should probably get that answer, and if the superintendent get that answer, we should. And I think, I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier because it's important, I know for Dr. Morris, that it's really a matter of balancing out the capital requests. If the school capital budget ends up coming in lighter because we change the investment priorities for this year, for example, we rent facilities instead of buying them, then I think the schools do support this analysis. All things being equal, eligible for reimbursement during the study process itself.
So my suggestion would be that we, through staff, ask Dr. Morris at least 3 questions and see if there's additional ones that are suggested, and then we need to move on. Question 1 is the inquiry and reimbursement possibility. The second one is that the petitioners have put a dollar amount estimate into their proposal, and whether that dollar amount proposal is the correct dollar amount or whether we should be considering something other than $40,000 up or down so that we know what it is. We give input on that question, and then the third is the priorities in the capital request for the schools. Are there other questions that we would want to have staff pose to Dr. Morris? So, yes.
Can you forward your PowerPoint to?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, well, so thank you very much. I really appreciate you being here and bringing this to us. And so, thank you.